going here. And can everyone still see the presentation screen?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Ooh. So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We haven't done one of these in a while, so it's good to be back sharing some information with you all. My name is Jordan Hollinger. I'm an associate planner with the City of Flagstaff, and I'm really happy to be here today with Ethan Amos, the Executive Director of Flagstaff Family Food Center, and Kaylee Wells, who's a Sustainability Specialist with the City of Flagstaff, and have them kind of talk about food in our region as part of our Snapshot series. So this particular Snapshot webinar was kind of born out of our visioning workshops, where we heard a lot from people that they don't know a whole lot about our food systems, and we as planners leading those workshops didn't necessarily know a whole lot about our food system. So we thought we'd rope in some experts to kind of look at what we know, what we don't know, and some really cool upcoming projects that the city will be working on. So just a quick overview. I'll do a few kind of overview slides here. These snapshot presentations are typically 15 minutes. They have gone as long as 30 minutes for some more complex topics, but we'll try to keep it on the short side. We are recording it and we'll post it to the regional plan update website, as well as the city YouTube page. This is a draft, and we know for sure that there will be a lot more information coming out of the city in the future on this topic. So if you have any resources or things that you'd like to share with us as a team, feel free to do that as well. We can always edit these. And we have about 23 of these existing on our website as well. So if you haven't seen some of our past videos, feel free to go to the website here and view some of those old ones. And if you don't see a topic that you'd like to see covered, feel free to reach out to myself or Sarah Dector. So just since we haven't done one of these in a while, I just wanted to kind of give a quick overview of how this all fits together in terms of the regional plan. So the regional plan is at the city our highest and broadest level planning document. It kind of sits at the top of this pyramid that you see here on the screen. Underneath that, we have specific plans and master plans that kind of refine some of the goals and policies and maybe even maps that you see in the regional plan. And then a lot of the what you see in the regional plan and specific plans then gets implemented through things like capital improvement projects, the city zoning code, engineering standards, budget items, that sort of thing. For the City of Flagstaff, the regional plan serves as our general plan, which is something that we are required by state law to adopt and update or re-adopt a new plan every 10 years. And it really is about land use decisions and has a lot of implications for our water supply designation, as well as our transportation planning. And then it contains a lot of other topics. Our current regional plan contains many topics across a lot of different areas. Not a whole lot on food systems, which is one of the reasons why we're here today. For Coconino County, the regional plan is an amendment to their county comprehensive plan. Instead of being ratified by voters, it's adopted by the Board of Supervisors, and it provides a map and place type map for the regional planning area. I think on my end, that is it. So I will turn my camera and mic off and turn it over to Ethan and Kaylee to get going here.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jordan. Hello, everyone. My name is Ethan, and I work at the food bank here in Flagstaff, and I'm really excited to be here today and just present on things that are happening. We have some unique things that we're talking about related to food systems. We'll keep it at a high level overview. There will be time for questions and lots of opportunities for rabbit trails that we are going to try and avoid. Might be impossible, but we'll try. So today we're going to cover just the, what is the question of what is a community food system, and then what does hunger look like in Flagstaff, and also current food systems and initiatives, food systems in the regional plan, and then also this really should be like a 5-hour seminar. I mean, there's so much to talk about. So we'll talk about maybe some of those questions at the end about what else is in our minds. So next slide, please. So if you don't know, the Flagstaff Family Food Center serves as the regional food distribution organization for Flagstaff. We do serve quite a bit of people who travel into town. This place was founded in 1991 by George McCullough. And in 2013, we merged with Northern Arizona Food Bank. So it might be confusing, you know, what you've heard of Northern Arizona Food Bank, you've heard of Flagstaff Family Food Center, you've heard of the St. Mary's Food Bank. So I'll talk about St. Mary's in a bit, but we at the Food Center absorbed Northern Arizona Food Bank, and we still have our kitchen program over in Sunnyside. And so we operate our food programs out of those two facilities. And then in 2021, we adopted a neighborhood distribution program where we get out into the community and get food closer to families so they don't have to commute as far. And then in 2023, we served as many as 2,000 people on any given day. And we've experienced an increase in numbers over the last couple of years, partly due to COVID, but some of the argument is that the need was there before COVID and it was just an unreached population. And then also we have new clients that have been impacted by inflation and are now coming to us for services. So that's us. Kaylee, next slide, please.
Thanks. My name is Kaylee Wells, and I'm the Sustainability Specialist for the City of Flagstaff. I manage waste diversion and food systems programming for our city. I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what the City of Flagstaff Sustainability Office is and does. So the mission of the City of Flagstaff Sustainability Office is to help cultivate a thriving and resourceful community, including reaching carbon neutrality by 2030. Through our office, we support many program areas, including climate, energy, community stewards, waste diversion, and food systems, which we'll be talking more about today. The goal of the food systems program is to increase access to local, healthy, and affordable food options for our residents. Next slide, please. So let's start out with the basics. What is a community food system and why is it important? Next slide, please. So there's a lot going on in this diagram, and I wanted to go through it together. So what is a food system? So the term food system refers to the constellation of activities involved in producing, processing, transporting, and consuming food. There are two reasons why this is important. So obviously, our diets are one of the biggest drivers of health and well-being. And then number two, our current food systems, including production, farming, processing, and global supply chains, have an enormous impact on our planet, driving climate change and threatening the environment. So what role does the Flagstaff Sustainability Office play in all of this? So local governments can engage in food systems planning to identify and understand the various food production and food security challenges and opportunities in their community, and develop public policy tools to better connect underserved residents. So the Flagstaff Sustainability Office manages the community gardens. We also have the Urban Farm Initiative, and we recently received a USDA grant to be able to learn more about what our food system looks like in terms of where does our food come from, who is growing our food, where is our food being consumed, how can we create a more robust food system. And then we will talk more about that grant later. And then I'll let Ethan talk about the role that the Flagstaff Family Food Center plays in our food system.
Great, thanks so much. I guess if you go back to the previous slide, I guess the question is, what is the role of the Flagstaff Family Food Center as it relates to the food system? And it's pretty plain in that we focus on empowering our clients by injecting wealth through food into the community. And we try to serve underserved and underrepresented populations as much as we can. And in Flagstaff, we have a transient population. Some of those folks are unsheltered. Some folks are in summer homes in Forest Highlands, and we have a population of individuals and families that travel to Flagstaff for services, and they live in rural areas, in tribal areas. And so when we think about strategic planning, it's important to factor in those individuals as well. And of course, we have to include the NAU population of students who come and go in the fall and spring. So next slide, please. So the question is, what does hunger look like in our community? And on the next slide, this is some of the data that we've seen over the last couple of years. And, you know, we haven't solved hunger and we haven't made a ton of progress in hunger relief, just as a country and as a world. So when we think about the reasons behind that, the needs are ever changing. The populations are that we serve are experiencing different challenges, and so we would have to have 200 or 300 programs to address every kind of situation out there, and it's just difficult. And therefore, it's difficult to track data and understand those trends over the last few years, especially as a nonprofit. We try our best to be as a no questions asked organization as possible. We want people to come and get their food without barriers, but we need to track data, and so we do ask some questions in some of our programs. But if some of this data seems foggy, there's reasons behind it that we can't really fix, but we are aware and trying to make progress on that. So you'll see this first icon. Food shortages force us to ration food from 82 pounds per box to 42 pounds. And so we got that from just before the pandemic, and even in the first part of the pandemic, there was a major outpouring coming together. Organizations and companies were donating food. So 82 pounds might have been skewed a little bit because we had shipments from Shamrock of gallons and gallons of milk that may skew the weight. But even before the pandemic, it was around 70 pounds, I think is our best guess. And over the last maybe 12 to 18 months, we've had to ration that down to about 42 up to maybe 50 pounds per visit. I probably should take the phrase food shortage out, just because it's kind of a bit scary, and there's probably lots of questions behind that. It might not be a food shortage entirely, but it may be a workforce shortage in getting that food from the farm to the plate. There's just not enough employees because of the great resignation season that we went through. And so there's lots of factors, but the point is we have a shortage of food in our warehouse. And then you see some other numbers there. We have a high population of American Indians and Alaska Natives that come to us. And so it's important to know that some of those folks are experiencing hunger at a greater rate than the other populations in our area. So, and then a quick glimpse down at the blue box down here. In 2019, the Food Center distributed just over 2,500 boxes of food to families. And then in July 2022, so this last July, served almost 6,500 boxes. And then the hot meal program, so last summer and throughout 2022, the kitchen averaged about 1,385 meals per day. And much of that goes to the shelter. So we provide all food to the Flagstaff family or Flagstaff Shelter Services. We're just feeding tons and tons and tons of people. It's just a massive reach. I came here in April of 2022, and I was just blown away when I was seeing these numbers, because it's a much larger nonprofit with a much larger reach than I knew before coming here. So, and when I say reach, I want to be specific in the fact that there's nonprofits out there who have tremendous impact, but they don't have a big reach. So I'm talking strictly numbers here. Next slide, please. Children, we will always try to keep children at the front of our minds when we're thinking about hunger, just because they're impacted a bit differently. Over 56% of kids are hungry in America, and those kids are more likely to have chronic PTSD and are way more likely to have severe depression. And this is where I like to bring in that personal feel, because hopefully most of us on the call today aren't having to experience hunger in the way that much of the populations are in Flagstaff. but we all get hungry, and we have to think about how we feel when we're hungry. And there's kids out there, there's individuals out there who have to deal with this every single day. And I know where my lunch is coming from. I have a burrito in the freezer and I'm going to eat it. And I don't have to worry about where it came from. Even if someone took that burrito, I can go get something. It's fine. It's not a major deal. But many of these kids, when they go home after school, they just don't know where that food is. So I don't put that into manipulate or anything, but it's just simply where too many kids are sitting and too many individuals are sitting in everyday life. So it definitely needs to come back to the forefront of discussion when it comes to food systems. And then just some more data in the larger box here for you. Almost 25% of children were in 2021 were experiencing hunger in Coconino County. And then in 2021, about 21% of our food went to kids. And that comes out to about 1.7 million pounds of food distributed. And so we're doing a lot, but we're not doing enough. So next slide, please. All right, so current food systems and initiatives and programs. Next slide, please. So the question is, where does our food come from at the food center? We distributed quite a bit in 2022, 6.7 million pounds, down from 7.98 in 2021. And so that comes from food drives, neighborhood food drives, donated goods, farmer surplus, they'll bring it by churches and corporations. And we purchase foods as well. And that manages the region. And so they send food to us to distribute to the agencies and families and individuals in Flagstaff. So the larger food bank is kind of like our big sister in the program, and that's St. Mary's Food Bank. So next slide, please. So from farm to fork, this is some imagery that kind of paints the picture of what it looks like. So in the green box, it goes from the farm. Arizona Food Bank Network helps manage where much of that food goes. And regionally, that goes to St. Mary's Food Bank, and they help distribute millions of pounds of food to us at the food center. And so it's up to us to find ways to get that food in community-based, neighborhood thinking type of models. And we have the neighborhood distribution program. We also have an agency shopping program where over 35 nonprofits are eligible to come to us to pick up food and use it for their programs. You know, we kind of want to be a one-stop shop for all things food in Flagstaff as it relates to our underserved populations. And it's just tough for other nonprofits to figure out how they're going to feed their clients, or even just throw parties for their clients. They can come to us and get that food to offset costs. And then we have our kitchen program, and that's where we're making the hot meals. And so we have different community partners that we send sandwiches and dinners to. We send to some schools out there, and also Flag Shelter Services. We provide over $500,000 of in-kind services to Flagstaff Shelter Services. And then surplus that we have, that food that goes bad, there's a couple things we're trying to do with that. We're trying to figure out ways to use food that is no longer useful for human consumption in the way that it is, but you can creatively reuse foods like old tomatoes and different things to make jams. And so we're trying to get increased education for our clients so that they can begin to use those if they choose to. And the rest of that food goes over to farms. So it's kind of completes the circle a bit. So that's what it looks like for us. Next slide, please.
Thanks. And now I'm going to talk about 3 food systems initiatives that are supported by the city of Flagstaff. So those 3 initiatives are the community gardens, the urban farm initiative, and then our recently awarded USDA grant. So let's talk about the community garden program first. So it first began in 2010 with the Bonito Street Community Garden, and has now expanded to 3 different gardens located throughout Flagstaff. We have the Bonito Street Garden, which is around 31 plots, the Isabel Street Community Garden, which is 17 plots, and then the Southside Community Garden, which is 9 plots. And the goal of the community garden program is to be able to provide community members with a space where they can grow food. So being able to increase our food resilience and being able to have those networks here in Flagstaff. So the way that it works is that plots are rented from May through October each year. They are $65 each to rent, and we have full and half scholarships available to those who need them. So we don't want that to be a barrier for our communities. At the community gardens, we host weekly volunteer days, and then we also host a monthly workshop series where we cover different topics such as rainwater harvesting or high elevation gardening or seed saving or different topics that can help people support people in their food production. At our community gardens, we also have the community compost hubs, which are 3-bin compost systems where community members can take their food scraps to be turned into compost, which is then used at the garden. So these are definitely amazing community spaces, and we're hoping to increase our number of community gardens moving forward. Next slide, please. So the next initiative that I wanted to talk with you about is the Urban Farm Initiative. And this is a great program that supports small local farmers and growers in our community. The City of Flagstaff established an initiative to essentially set aside parcels of city-owned land for food production. So what does this look like? The goals of the program are to establish high quality urban agriculture sites. So they don't have to be huge. We're just hoping to produce food at these properties. We also want to increase access to healthy and affordable food in our community. We want to improve the environmental conditions on and around the vacant land, and then provide benefits to surrounding residents, such as making the vacant land look better, increasing property values, and also providing employment opportunities through the business that is here. Next slide, please. So we currently have one active urban farm incubator, which is located at the Thorpe Park Annex. This property is currently being leased to Ruby Earth Gardens, which grows vegetables on the property that are then sold at local farmers markets. There's also a local pollinator garden at the Urban Farm Incubator, which supports pollinator species. Next slide, please. So the last initiative that I wanted to talk with you about is really big. So in 2022, the Flagstaff Sustainability Office received around $184,000 to support the Assessing and Growing Sustainable Community System project. Through the USDA grant, we have about 3 years to develop a comprehensive food systems assessment, which is essentially a data collection tool for improving a community's understanding of food access and distribution. Through the grant, we'd also like to conduct an innovative food feasibility study, which will look at the practicality of different business options, such as vertical gardening. And then finally, in year 3, we would like to create a food action plan, which will help to guide the city's food-related policies and programming moving forward. Next slide, please.
All right, so now we're going to talk about food systems and the regional plan. Some things to consider, it's a draft and we can bring discussions related to the regional plan. And Kaylee and I's goal is just to sort of bring those to the table. And we don't have expectations as it relates to the regional plan yet, but we want that brainstorm to continue so that key decision makers have all the data and the information they need to implement food systems into their regional plan, especially since it relates to land use. Next slide, please.
So looking at the slide, these are opportunities for the regional plan. So to include food production areas. So we are going to look at zoning, water, and transportation systems. So first, let's look at zoning. So one potential area for growth in the regional plan is to increase the number of zones where we can support food production, which will help us to address food deserts and be able to produce more food in our community. So right now there are only like a few zones where you can produce food, so expanding that number of zones. Then looking at our water situation. So what does water prioritization look like in our community? And how does water prioritization impact food production? I think it's important to ask the community, is food production a good use of our water? And then also looking at how much water will food production require in the future? And then the last item is like transportation systems. So by having food here in our community, we reduce our emissions. And I'll let Ethan talk about food transportation and distribution.
So when we think about this here, I don't think you can go to a community meeting where you hope to address issues. The issues that always come up are housing and transportation. And those are barriers in our community that we're constantly working on, and I think we're making improvements. But transportation is something that prevents one person from being able to get to places where there's food available for them, and that becomes problematic when that is a recurring issue for an individual. And that means that there's probably several individuals out there who are having issues. So as we think about transportation, it's important for us to consider what's being done. And, I think the food bank is very cutting edge in terms of trying to get out into the community and getting away from that Western food bank thinking of, having everyone come to us at the warehouse. That's how most food banks across America are set up. And, we want to be able to get out into the community. And we often tell our clients, if you come to our warehouse, you've probably passed by neighborhood distribution at some point closer to you. So also, it takes lots of partnerships working with key players in transportation. The bus system is something that's very, I would say it's very robust and constantly looking to improve itself in Flagstaff. So it's just a matter of having those conversations and addressing the issues related to transportation and the food system. So great. Next slide.
So we just talked about all of the areas where the regional plan could include food system production and better food system or food production distribution. And so right now there's only one policy in the regional plan that directly addresses food production and food security. And the one policy that's in the regional plan currently allows and encourages urban agriculture. So looking into the future, what new policies can we create? How can we better support food production and distribution? And we have a lot of room for growth in this area. Next slide, please.
Okay, so, more to be curious about. I'll just read these questions verbatim so we can see some other considerations. First one, how can we prioritize and protect food production in the regional plan? Then how can we support new agricultural technologies that make better use of land and water? And how will our food systems change as a result of climate change? How can we better integrate food systems into the climate action plan? And how do we improve access to nutritious, local, and culturally appropriate food options? And I'll just end with a comment saying, that the food bank, the food insecurity programs that we have mimic many other programs across the nation, but I think it's becoming more and more apparent that the programs are not flawless. We can't control all the food that comes into the food bank, and so we can't control what goes out. And sometimes it's a question of health, and are we sending out foods that are, contributing to issues related to health disparities? And so we're trying to address those and improve access to nutritious, local, culturally appropriate foods. So that's just an example of how these questions are in our minds and what we're trying to do to improve our programs and initiatives related to the food system. So thanks. That concludes our presentation. and thank you for the time.
Great. Thank you both for that great presentation. Again, just really thankful to have you both here, and especially Ethan, since he's outside of the city in terms of his employment. I'm just really glad to have you here with your wealth of knowledge about kind of local food issues in Flagstaff. So want to open it up now to have some Q&A time. So we'll keep recording for now, but if you'd rather ask your question offline, I'll stop recording in a little bit here. So, but yeah, just open floor now to ask questions to either Ethan or Kaylee or myself.
This is Mikhail. I have a question. What would both of you see as like the top 3 priorities moving forward?
Do you mean like the top 3 priorities concerning food systems, or would you mind providing more specifics?
Just taking this whole big landscape, it's like, so for somebody who knows absolutely zero about this, thank you for the overview. And I'm just looking at from where you're sitting, your expertise and your experience with the area, what would be like your top 3 initiatives that you would want to really push forward, especially in the context of the regional plan?
Well, when you said in the context of the regional plan, that really narrowed it down for me. But I think just in general, the food bank here is focused on client empowerment. We want to have a model where clients have more choice. We would never tell our clients how to eat or what to eat, but we're having more discussions internally about how we can continue to provide the food that we provide, but we empower clients to make decisions for the betterment of their health based on knowledge that they can get. And so it's we feel an obligation to be a part of that nutrition conversation, holding ourselves accountable so that we make sure we're a part of that. And then also the second thing is to be a part of more, we want to have a seat at the table. I think food banks are usually taking the role because they get so darn busy, and they usually run on a staff of 3 or 4 with 10 or so volunteers. The food centers has a luxury where we have a larger budget, we have more staff, and we have more volunteers. So we are by default a bigger player in the food systems discussion, but we need to own that and get at the seat and have more conversations related to policy and advocacy, because we have data, we have narratives related to what our clients are going through. We have experience with them. Many of our volunteers have lived experience. So getting those people a voice to the seat at the table, I think we can play that role much better. So those are 2 priorities for us. They kind of relate to the regional plan, because I would say a flaw of the regional plan is that it doesn't, in terms of pure language, grab onto the discussion related to food insecurity. And I think that the regional plan should have that. I don't know. I don't have an answer. If you gave me the keyboard and said type in policy, that'd be quite ambitious for me, but I think that we should at least have the conversation. So I really, really appreciate the City of Flagstaff team to invite me and allow me to have a seat. And so that's
I can chime in on the regional plan front in regards to that. I think, when we think about what the regional plan is really about, it's really centered around land use and how we use our land. But the way that we use our land is so critical for the way in which we live our lives, from how we move from place to place and how close things are to us, to the amount of water that's being used over a certain area of land. So when we think about food access as it relates to land use and transportation systems, we don't currently have a great understanding of that in Flagstaff. And I think one of the most exciting things to hopefully come out of the USDA grant, we'll be able to take some of that knowledge base that comes from the food the food assessment that the sustainability office is going to do, and kind of look at that in the context of our land use goals and policies in the regional plan. So I think there's just a lot more to learn on the city's front. This has not been an area that the city has acquired a whole lot of knowledge about, and we're working hard to kind of improve that knowledge. So I guess an element of my answer is also TBD. We'll see what comes out of the USDA grant and the food assessment. It'll be really interesting that happens kind of in parallel with the regional plan update.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Other questions? I see a hand up. Who's that? Michelle.
Great, thank you. I think my question is very similar to what Mikhail wrote in the chat. Can we designate land use for better service of food insecurity? That's the question I had, is how do we define areas that could be used for growing food? Or do we just leave it kind of open, and if somebody has something, then we could include them in the zoning? Does that make sense? And I'm particularly thinking outside the city limits. I mean, in the city limits too, but outside, in that area that's in the county but not in the city, has a lot of potential for growing food. Do we have to identify it, or do we just, in the regional plan, just put the policies in place and then, rezone or something when somebody wants to do it? I'm just trying to figure out the logistics of putting it into action on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So as I sort of showed on one of the first slides there, just the kind of pyramid hierarchy of planning and implementation efforts. So, as it pertains to land use and what you can kind of do where in the city and the county, both jurisdictions are governed by an adopted zoning code. And so when we adopt a new regional plan, that doesn't automatically change anything as it pertains to existing entitlements in existing zoning codes. But through maps, goals, policies, we can start to identify maybe gaps in food access, and think about, really the mechanism in the regional plan is to set goals and policies that speak to food production or food access, and how that gets implemented through a potential zoning code amendment, whether that's changing the allowed uses for a particular zone. That is probably the most direct mechanism that we would say, okay, so our zoning code as it's currently written may not be overly friendly to, or may not be set up well as it was adopted in 2011 to allow kind of current technology in urban agriculture, whether that's kind of indoor farming. So, potentially the avenue there is to look at, what does our zoning code allow? Where are we allowing it? And should we reconsider where those uses are allowed in both the city zoning code and the county zoning code? So there would need to be, in terms of where you could do that, food production of a variety of types, that would be some sort of zoning code focused implementation tool.
So it'd be after the regional plan, of course.
Yes. Yeah.
And then maybe something to think about when we're thinking about policies is connecting that water question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Kaylee, in your presentation, you posed a question. Is this does the community think this is a valuable use of water? And maybe a policy could be, doing it in a way, growing food in a way that reduces water use. That doesn't overuse. I don't know how to define that, but there are ways to do that, right? So that someone doesn't come in and start pumping a bunch of water for, growing watermelons or something that takes a lot of, or alfalfa for that matter, that fits into our community, something that uses water wisely, I guess. We could put something into the regional plan about that, right? In terms of a policy or a goal.
Certainly, that would be a potential domain. Of course, we haven't written any of the new plan. It's a ways to go before we actually start putting pen to paper. But those are the types of considerations that are absolutely appropriate for the regional plan, or potentially appropriate for the regional plan.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It looks like Sarah has her hand up. I'm really glad you guys are doing this, because this is one of the things I've been thinking about that isn't in the current plan that we need to add into the new one. So glad you guys are talking about it.
Yeah. A way that our current plan kind of works against what you were just talking about, Michelle, is that it really identifies that we should only be pursuing low water consumption industries, which I think has that water conservation mindset. But that really does, some of the urban agricultural uses could be considered a high water consumption industry. And so there's a need to look at that again and say, do we mean that for everything as universally as we have currently stated it, or are there some criteria for when urban agriculture could still conform to the plan, but maybe not necessarily be as rigid in water conservation as other things? We're very lucky in Flagstaff that we are not seeing the cuts in our water supply, because we don't use Colorado River water like the southern portion of the state does, but that is having a big effect on agriculture statewide. Most of the lettuce and greens that we consume in the grocery store are coming from Yuma, which is having extensive water cuts to the agricultural sector due to the Colorado River compact discussion. And so where will that food that's not being produced in Yuma anymore be grown? And how much of it could serve our community by being grown and distributed locally? Maybe the kind of opportunity that the change in conditions might allow us to discuss.
Thanks, Sarah. That was a added good information. Thanks.
All right. Any other questions before I stop recording and then ask again? All right, I will stop the recording